Deep beneath the Earth's surface, in an abandoned excavation site, a team of archaeologists tumbled upon something that should never have been uncovered. The ground had been cracked open as part of a routine dig, but what they found was far from ordinary. An object unlike any they had ever seen before. It was metallic, smooth, and sleek, with no visible seams or markings. The device seemed to hum faintly, as if it were alive, though it had been buried for millennia. The moment it was touched, a strange pulse of energy surged through the earth itself. The vibrations were felt across continents, as if a distant signal had awakened from the depths of time. The team immediately reported the find to global authorities, who quickly dispatched scientists and military experts to the site. There was no telling what this object was or where it came from. Some suggested it was of alien origin. Others believed it to be an ancient relic from a forgotten human civilization, but none could explain the strange hum that seemed to radiate from it, as though it were calling out to something or someone. At first, the object was believed to be a communication device, but as the days passed and the hum grew stronger, the realization began to set in that it was much more than that. A secret buried beneath layers of earth and time had been unearthed, and now it was active again. What had been dormant for centuries was suddenly awake and reaching out to the stars. The military took control of the excavation site, quickly setting up a perimeter and sealing off the area to prevent civilian access, as scientists worked to analyze the object's composition and figure out its purpose. The mysterious energy began to spread, a ripple effect across the planet. No one understood it at first, but across the globe, strange phenomena began to occur: power surges, electronic malfunctions, and mysterious flashes in the sky. People began to whisper about the return of something ancient, something powerful. Then came the transmissions. They started small, faint bursts of static over communication channels. At first it was dismissed as interference, but then the patterns became too deliberate to ignore. They were signals from somewhere out in the galaxy, somewhere far beyond Earth's reach. The signals were coming from multiple sources, each one more distinct than the last. They were not random, they were messages, and they were being sent to Earth. At the United Nations emergency meetings were held. Leaders from around the world gathered to discuss the implications of the discovery. A united front had to be formed, but in truth fear was spreading faster than the knowledge. No one knew who was behind these signals or what they wanted, but one thing was certain: someone or something was trying to communicate with Earth, and it wasn't long before the truth would reveal itself. As the world watched in anxious anticipation, the object beneath the excavation site began to glow brighter each passing day, and then in an instant the hum stopped. The sky above Earth rippled as though the fabric of reality had been torn open, and then it happened. A massive ship entered Earth's atmosphere. It was unlike anything the world had ever seen, sleek and dark. With an otherworldly design, the ship descended into the heart of the planet's largest ocean, sending shockwaves across the globe. As the world held its breath, waiting for what came next, the warriors were coming, and they were not of Earth. The arrival of the massive ship was unlike anything the world had ever witnessed. As it hovered above Earth's oceans, the ship cast a dark shadow over the waters, its smooth surface shimmering with an unnatural glow. It moved with precision and purpose, as though guided by an intelligence far beyond human understanding. Across the globe, people paused in their daily routines to look up at the sky, some in awe, others in terror. News broadcasts broke through with live feeds showing the enormous craft descending the atmosphere. Ripples of panic spread faster than the ship's descent. Governments scrambled to react as military jets flew towards the unknown vessel, only to be immediately intercepted and forced to retreat. The ship touched down gently on the ocean's surface, sending waves cascading outward, and then it stilled. The world was silent, in a state of suspended disbelief. No one knew what to expect next. Moments passed, but felt like hours, as the world waited in anticipation to see if these visitors were friend or foe. Then the world's worst fears began to manifest when the first of the ancient warriors emerged from the ship. The figures were massive, towering over any human by several feet. Their bodies were encased in armor of a design that appeared both futuristic and ancient. At the same time, their armor glowed faintly blue, as if infused with energy, and their eyes gleamed with an unsettling intensity. The warriors were not human, and yet their presence was undeniably familiar. Their faces were sharp and angular, marked with scars from countless battles. Their movements were fluid and purposeful, as if they were accustomed to war, but it was the power they emanated that took the breath away. Their very presence seemed to alter the air around them. As the warriors made their way from the ship, they did not speak, but instead moved with an air of quiet authority, their actions deliberate, and their gaze unwavering towards Earth's leaders, who were already gathering at the edge of the ocean. The tension was palpable. No one dared approach the towering figures, but all eyes were locked upon them. Then one warrior stepped forward, his voice deep and commanding, echoing across the beach like a thunderclap. "I am Azalor," he said. His words carried an ancient weight. "We are the guardians of Earth's legacy, and we have come to awaken what has long been buried beneath this world." The announcement was met with stunned silence from the crowd of military personnel, diplomats, and scientists who had assembled to witness the moment. Azalor continued his gaze, never leaving the gathered assembly, his voice unyielding. "Your ancestors were once part of a galactic empire, a civilization that spanned countless worlds. But when the empire fell, we were left behind to protect this world and its people. You are the heirs of a forgotten legacy, and we are here to ensure that you are ready for what comes next." At those words, a collective chill ran through the crowd. It was as if the very foundation of human history had been shaken to its core. The warriors were not merely visitors from another world. They were guardians sent by a civilization far older than Earth itself. They had returned not to explore, but to prepare humanity for a coming war that would sweep across the stars. Azalor's gaze swept across the crowd, his expression unreadable as he spoke again. "The galaxy is not a peaceful place. There are enemies out there, enemies that have long coveted this world. We have been waiting for the moment when your people would be ready to face them. Now that moment has arrived." A wave of fear and disbelief spread across the crowd. What could they possibly be ready for? What kind of enemy would force the return of these warriors? But Azalor's next words sent a cold shiver through everyone present. "The Fathrul are coming, and they will stop at nothing to claim this world as their own." Azalor's words hung heavy in the air, like a storm waiting to break. "The Fathrul are coming," he had said, and the world had frozen in place. Humanity's leaders exchanged nervous glances, but none dared interrupt as the ancient warrior continued to speak, his voice unwavering and full of authority. The Fathrul were no mere invaders. They were a dark force that had ravaged the galaxy for centuries. The warriors revealed that they were the last survivors of a once mighty empire that spanned the stars. The empire had been built on the backs of countless worlds and cultures, and Earth had been one of the empire's founding planets. But the Fathrul had risen from the shadows and destroyed everything in their path until the empire crumbled into ruin. The warriors' homeworld had fallen to the Fathrul years before Earth had even realized the existence of the galaxy beyond their own. They had sent their best and brightest to Earth to safeguard the planet and to ensure that the remnants of the empire's legacy would remain untouched by the Fathrul's grasp. But when the warriors had arrived, they found Earth in a state of complacency. Its people were ignorant of the vastness of the universe and the threats that lurked in the dark corners of space. Azalor's eyes narrowed as he spoke of the Fathrul. Their reputation struck fear into the hearts of even the bravest beings in the galaxy. The Fathrul were not just a species, they were an ideology, a force of destruction and conquest that sought to strip the galaxy of its resources and subjugate any civilization that stood in their way. For centuries, they had systematically wiped out entire star systems, and now they had set their sights on Earth. The warriors had come not as conquerors, but as protectors. Their mission was clear: to defend humanity from the Fathrul and to prepare them for the war that was coming. But they knew it would not be easy. The Fathrul would not stop until they had claimed Earth as their own. Humanity had been living in isolation for so long that it had forgotten the ancient arts of war. The warriors knew that they would need to train the humans to be more than just survivors. They needed to become warriors capable of fighting alongside them. In the coming battles, the training would be brutal and unforgiving, but it was the only way to prepare Earth for what lay ahead. In the following days, the warriors began to reveal more of their technology and knowledge to Earth's leaders. They brought with them weapons and tools from their ancient civilization. that would allow humanity to defend itself against the Fathrul, but they also brought the stories of the Empire's downfall, and the lessons learned from that war. Humanity would have to learn from the mistakes of the past if they were to have any hope of survival. As the warriors shared their knowledge with the world, they began to notice something unexpected. A fire ignited within the people of Earth. The once complacent humans began to rally behind the warriors as they absorbed their training, and their wisdom. Something within them awakened a fierce determination to protect their home and to fight back against the darkness that threatened to consume them. But even as Earth's warriors began to rise, the Fathrul's forces were moving closer. Their ships were already on the outskirts of the solar system, and they were preparing to strike with devastating force. The warriors knew that time was running out, and that they would have to act quickly if Earth was to have any chance of survival. The warriors had spoken of the Fathrul, of their unrelenting drive to conquer and destroy, but they knew that Earth was not yet ready for such a war. There was still much to be done. Azalor and his comrades did not trust that humanity could simply rise to the occasion without a test. The warriors knew the human spirit, resilient but fragile, and they understood that strength was forged through hardship. The first trial would be a test of humanity's worth, and it would be unlike anything Earth had ever known. The warriors set up a series of trials, not just for Earth's military forces, but for civilians as well. They were not simply testing for combat prowess. They were searching for something deeper. A team of elite soldiers, engineers, and scientists were chosen to participate, and the trials were set to begin in remote locations across the globe. Each trial was designed to break their bodies and minds, to push them beyond their limits, to see if they could emerge as something greater than what they had been. The first trial was simple in its design: survival in a hostile environment. The participants were dropped into an isolated jungle, teeming with unseen dangers. There was no food, no shelter, and the terrain was a treacherous maze of ravines, rivers, and dense foliage. The warriors had watched from afar as the human teams struggled to adapt, some faltering within hours, others showing surprising ingenuity as they used the resources of the jungle to build shelter and find food. But the warriors had anticipated this. The real challenge wasn't survival. It was about endurance, adaptability, and the capacity for teamwork. Azalor observed silently from a distance as the humans learned quickly. The military leaders were learning how to be more than just soldiers. They were learning to be survivors. But even the bravest faltered when night fell, and the jungle's dangers began to emerge. Creatures, large and fast, hunted in the darkness. Strange, venomous plants lurked in the underbrush, waiting for an unsuspecting foot to tread too close. For days, the participants battled exhaustion, fear, and their own doubts. By the time the trial ended, only half of the original group remained. Some had fallen to the beasts of the jungle. Others had been undone by the terrain's unyielding harshness. But in the survivors, Azalor saw a spark, something raw and untamed. They had faced their fears and learned to work together, to rely on each other's strengths. They had endured. The next trial was one of intellect and innovation. The participants were transported to a sprawling underground complex where they would need to solve intricate puzzles and construct complex machines using only basic materials. The tests grew increasingly more difficult, requiring ingenuity and quick thinking. They were asked to build tools for survival, devices for defense, and methods of communication, tasks that required both technical expertise and creativity. The warriors watched as human minds clicked into gear, some falling into despair when the challenges seemed insurmountable, while others began to shine, applying concepts the warriors had not expected. But the real test came not from the puzzles but from the time constraints. The longer it took them to work through the problems, the less chance they had of surviving. The Fathrul were coming, and the warriors knew it was only a matter of time before the invasion began. They needed to see if humanity could think fast under pressure, if they could innovate on the fly in the face of danger. In the final moments of the trial, just as exhaustion began to take its toll, one human, an engineer named Mora, managed to unlock the final puzzle. She activated the device that would allow them to signal for rescue, securing their survival. The warriors were impressed not just by her success, but by the tenacity of the entire group. They had all been pushed beyond their limits, and though some had failed, the survivors had proven that humanity was capable of more than the warriors had first believed. But the trials were far from over. The Fathrol would not wait much longer, and the warriors had seen enough to know that the true battle was about to begin. The next test would demand even more from the humans, and it would be a battle not just for survival, but for the future of Earth itself. As the warriors watched the survivors of the trials, a sense of cautious hope began to build. Earth's warriors were evolving, adapting, and the warriors knew that in the coming battle, these humans might just be the key to turning the tide against the Fathrol. But as they prepared for the next phase of training, the warriors' optimism was about to be shattered. There were darker forces at play than anyone had anticipated, forces hidden deep within the human ranks, working in the shadows. The world had been uneasy since the arrival of the warriors, and it wasn't just fear of the Fathrol that had stirred unrest. There were factions among humanity that saw the warriors not as protectors, but as a threat to their own power. Some governments had begun to question the necessity of their alliance with these ancient beings, fearing the potential consequences of allowing such a powerful force to gain a foothold on Earth. These factions, once small and seemingly insignificant, began to coalesce, using fear and misinformation to rally others to their cause. What started as whispers of distrust soon grew into organized resistance. It was during the peak of the warriors' training program that the betrayal unfolded. The warriors had initiated a final series of defensive simulations, a test to prepare Earth's forces for what was sure to come. The stakes were higher than ever. The Fathrol's invasion fleet was nearing, and humanity had to be ready to fight back. But as the simulation began, the unthinkable happened. The weapons systems that had been prepared for the defense simulation suddenly malfunctioned, causing chaos in the training zones. Explosions rocked the base, throwing soldiers into confusion. At first, it seemed like a glitch, a technical failure, but as the alarms blared and the warriors scrambled to regain control, something far more sinister became apparent. The sabotaged systems weren't an accident. They had been deliberately tampered with. Azalor's warriors quickly realized that the sabotage had been coordinated from within their ranks. Someone had worked behind the scenes, ensuring that the weapons failed at the most critical moment. The disruption had allowed an attack by an unknown force to break through the perimeter, sending a small army of Fathrol soldiers deep into Earth's defenses. They were not the full-scale invasion force, but a harbinger of what was to come, a warning shot. The warriors and human forces quickly fought back, but the damage was done. Several warriors were lost in the skirmish, their advanced technology unable to prevent the surprise assault. As the dust settled, the true extent of the betrayal began to come into focus. Human collaborators, working with the Fathrol, had infiltrated the highest levels of Earth's leadership. There were spies, traitors who had long ago decided that Earth's future lay not in fighting the Fathrol, but in allying with them. They had sabotaged the military's defense efforts to ensure that the Fathrol's arrival would be unchallenged. Azalor, his face grim, addressed the survivors in the aftermath. The warriors had once believed humanity would be their allies, but now they faced the brutal truth. A portion of Earth's own people had chosen to side with the Fathrol. In the chaos of the attack, it became clear that the Fathrol weren't just a threat from the outside. They had already begun to influence Earth's inner workings. The warriors and their human allies were forced to confront a new kind of enemy, one that had blended with Earth's society like a cancer. And with the Fathrol now aware of the warriors' presence and Earth's ability to fight back, they would not hesitate to take their revenge. Azalor's voice was hard as he addressed the troops. "The battle has changed," he said, his eyes scanning the room. "We are not just fighting invaders from the stars. We are fighting a war within our own ranks. These traitors have sealed their fate, and they will face judgment. But first, we must ensure that humanity does not fall before the Fathrol." With the Fathrol now closer than ever, Earth's forces would have to deal with not only the external threat, but also the internal treason that could undermine everything they had fought for. The true war had begun, and humanity's resolve would be tested in ways it had never imagined. But for Azalor and the other warriors, there was no turning back. The fate of Earth, and perhaps the galaxy, was at stake, and in this moment of betrayal, they would have to decide who among them was worthy of the fight ahead. The betrayal had left a scar on the warriors' alliance with humanity, but it was not just the sabotage that weighed heavily on their minds. The Fathrol's forces were on the move, and every minute spent dealing with the internal conflict gave them more time to strike. The warriors understood that the true nature of the enemy wasn't just the Fathrol soldiers, but the overwhelming cunning and cruelty of the Fathrol mindset. They didn't simply conquer planets, they twisted their inhabitants, turning them into subservient pawns or tools to further their endless desire for domination. Azalor gathered the surviving human leaders and warriors in the main command center, their faces grim in the low light. The time for uncertainty had passed. The sabotage had been a catalyst, revealing the deeper, more insidious nature of their enemies. The human collaborators had shown themselves to be just a small faction, but what worried Azalor more was the possibility that they were merely the first wave of a far larger conspiracy. The Fathrol's reach was extensive, and they knew how to infiltrate and corrupt civilizations from the inside. "We were naive," Azalor said, his voice cold as steel. "We thought the Fathrol were simply invaders. They are much more than that. They are a force that spreads corruption. They have no interest in peace, only in conquest. Earth's enemies are not just those who fight for the Fathrol. They are among us, wearing our faces." The room was silent, the weight of his words sinking in. The warriors had seen it before on other worlds, how the Fathrol twisted the hearts of men, how they turned them into puppets, promising power, immortality, or something greater than themselves. In return, the Fathrol gained access to the most secret corners of their societies, manipulating governments, factions, even entire populations. One of the human generals, a woman named Kiera, spoke up. "How do we fight this? If they've infiltrated us this deep, how do we trust anyone?" Azalor's gaze hardened. "You don't. You fight with those you know. You fight with honor. And you must start thinking as one unit. The Fathrol will try to divide us, to turn us against each other. We cannot let them." A cold realization settled in the hearts of everyone in that room. They were not just fighting to defend Earth. They were fighting to protect themselves from the insidious influence of the Fathrol, who had already begun to warp their trust and unity. The warriors had been preparing Earth's forces for combat against the Fathrol, but now their training took a darker turn. It was no longer just about weapons and strategy. It was about vigilance and loyalty. The human military and the warriors would need to find the hidden traitors among them, those who had been compromised by the Fathrol or who had willingly sold their souls to them. The warriors, experts in detection and mind manipulation, would lead this search, but even they were not invincible. The Fathrol's influence was subtle, and they could hide in plain sight. Days turned into weeks as the Earth's forces went through another round of grueling tests, not just physical, but psychological as well. It was a race against time, as the Fathrol invasion fleet was nearing the solar system. The warriors had taken every precaution to shield Earth from their advanced technologies, but their intelligence suggested that the invasion was imminent. There would be no more time for preparation. Azalor stood in the command center, his eyes fixed on the data feeds. "They are coming," he said quietly, as a chilling realization spread throughout the room. The Fathrol fleet had finally entered the outer reaches of the solar system. Their ships, vast and dark, had begun to cluster near the edges of the asteroid belt. The invasion was no longer a distant threat. It was now a reality. But just as it seemed all hope might be lost, something unexpected happened. One of the warriors, an older figure named Velgar, approached Azalor with urgent news. He had uncovered something among the hidden files of the traitors, a plan. An alliance between the Fathrol and a faction of humans had been forged. but the details were more alarming than anything they had imagined. "There is a hidden weapon," Velger said, his voice tense with the weight of the revelation. "A weapon designed not to fight the Fathrul directly, but to control them." The room fell silent. A weapon that could control the Fathrul. This was no ordinary weapon. It was the key to turning the tide of war. But who among them could be trusted to wield it? And what price would it exact? Azalor's mind raced as he weighed the implications. The fight had just become far more complicated. The Fathrul were not only coming to invade, they were bringing with them a force of betrayal far more powerful than anyone had imagined. And now Earth had to face a new, horrifying truth. The weapon that could save them could also destroy them. The revelation of the weapon that could control the Fathrul had sent shockwaves through the command center. Earth's last hope for survival wasn't just in fighting the Fathrul. It was in mastering the weapon that could turn their invincible enemies into tools of their own will. But the implications of such a weapon were far more complex than anyone could fully grasp. To control the Fathrul was to harness an ancient destructive force, and to wield that power came with risks beyond comprehension. Azalor's mind was clouded with doubt as he stood before the gathered commanders and warriors. The room was thick with tension, each person in the room aware that the fate of humanity, and perhaps the galaxy itself, was about to be decided by a single choice. The weapon was real, hidden within an abandoned facility, deep within the mountains of a war-torn region. It had been designed during the height of the Empire, a means of gaining control over entire civilizations. But the Fathrul were no ordinary foe. They had been born from the same ancient curse that had corrupted the galaxy. Their insatiable thirst for power made them nearly impossible to control. "Who will use it?" General Kiera asked, her voice shaking with the weight of the decision. "If this weapon works as described, it could turn the Fathrul against their own kind. But what if it doesn't? What if it corrupts us instead?" Azalor met her gaze, his expression solemn. "The weapon was never meant to be used by anyone, not even the ancient warriors. But it is our only option now. We cannot face the Fathrul without it. However, you must understand, this weapon could very well change you. You will not be the same person once you use it. It is a temptation that has undone empires before." A heavy silence descended upon the room. It was not just a question of how they would fight the Fathrul, but who they would become in the process. The warriors knew the power of temptation well. In their past, even the mightiest of beings had been corrupted by the lure of ultimate control. The Fathrul themselves were a result of that very temptation, and now humanity was on the brink of facing the same challenge. Mara, the engineer who had shown brilliance during the trials, stepped forward. "I'm willing to go," she said, her voice steady despite the uncertainty. "If it means saving humanity, I'll take that risk." Azalor looked at her, his expression unreadable. "And you would be ready to live with the consequences of such a choice. The Fathrul are not just enemies, they are reflections of our darkest impulses. To control them is to risk losing our humanity." Mara nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. "I understand, but what other choice do we have? The Fathrul are already at our doorstep. We need to do this, or everything we fought for will be lost." Azalor's heart wavered. He had seen many warriors brave the ultimate sacrifice, but something about this moment felt different. It wasn't just a matter of facing death, it was a question of what kind of legacy humanity would leave behind. Would they be the conquerors or the conquered? Would they retain their humanity, or would they become something darker in the process? Kiera spoke again, her voice trembling with resolve. "I'll go with her," she said. "If we are going to use this weapon, we'll need each other. No one should face it alone." The decision had been made. Mara and Kiera would journey to the hidden facility, where the weapon was stored. The rest of the warriors and Earth's forces would prepare for the final confrontation with the Fathrul. They knew the invasion was only days away, and every moment spent in hesitation could be their last. The weapon would be humanity's last hope, but it could also be their greatest curse. As Mara and Kiera readied themselves for the mission, Azalor's voice broke the silence. "Remembered," he said, his tone grave. "The Fathrul may be cruel, but they are not our true enemy. The real enemy lies within us. The temptation to wield power without understanding the cost." The two women nodded, their faces set in determination. The choice was made, and with it, a path had been forged that would lead them either to salvation or destruction. The warriors and the remaining forces watched as Mara and Kara left the command center, their silhouettes fading into the distance. Azalor stood alone, gazing out into the sky, where the Fathrul fleet loomed ever closer. The future of Earth was now in the hands of the two women, and the weapon they were about to unleash. The storm was coming, and it was unlike any humanity had ever faced. The Fathrul fleet had entered the inner reaches of the solar system, their ships dark and ominous against the backdrop of the stars. It was no longer a question of whether Earth would survive. It was a question of how. As the final countdown to the invasion began, Azalor and his warriors stood at the front lines, preparing for the battle that would decide the fate of the planet. But the real weight of Earth's survival lay not in the warriors' hands, but in those of Mara and Kara. They had journeyed into the mountains, through dangerous terrain and forgotten ruins, to reach the hidden facility where the weapon lay. The journey had not been easy. They had fought off factions of traitors, navigated through underground mazes, and braved the cold isolation of the facility. Now, standing before the weapon, they knew that their next move would either bring salvation or doom. The weapon was unlike anything they had imagined. It was a massive device, ancient and imposing, built deep into the heart of the earth. It hummed with an eerie energy, as though it was alive, waiting for the right moment to awaken. Both women approached it with caution, the weight of their decision hanging heavily between them. Mara reached out, her fingers brushing the cold metal surface of the weapon. The room around them seemed to pulse with power, and for a moment she felt an overwhelming pull toward it, a darkness whispering to her, promising control, power beyond imagining. She shook her head, trying to push away the feeling. Kara, watching her, placed a hand on her shoulder. "We can still turn back," Kara said softly. "We don't have to do this. We can fight the Fathrul with what we have." But Mara's gaze never wavered from the weapon. "We don't have time. If we don't use this now, Earth is finished. We're the last chance." Kara sighed, her heart heavy with the weight of the decision. She had always believed that humanity could face any challenge without relying on dark powers. But the Fathrul were unlike anything they had encountered, and without the weapon, they were no match for the coming storm. With a final nod, Kara stepped back. "Then let's do it. Together." With a deep breath, Mara activated the device. A violent surge of energy pulsed through the facility, shaking the ground beneath their feet. The air was thick with tension as the weapon came to life, its deep hum resonating throughout the entire mountain. Suddenly, a cold voice echoed in their minds, as though the weapon itself were speaking to them. "You seek to control the Fathrul, to harness their power. But know this, power comes at a cost. The words sent chills through both women, but there was no turning back now. They pressed forward, determined to wield the weapon, whatever the cost. As the energy from the device reached its peak, a powerful beam of light shot out from the facility, tearing through the atmosphere and reaching out toward the Fathrul fleet. Back at Earth's command center, Azalor and the other warriors watched in awe as the beam cut through the sky. It was as though the heavens themselves had split open. The Fathrul fleet, sensing the weapon's power, began to respond, their ships lurching forward with terrifying speed. But as they drew closer, something unexpected happened. The beam didn't just strike the Fathrul ships. It corrupted them, turning their once imposing vessels into twisted, grotesque shapes. The Fathrul themselves, the twisted beings that had once been the terror of the galaxy, began to writhe in agony as the weapon's power took hold of them. Azalor's eyes widened in realization. They're being controlled, manipulated. The weapon had worked. The Fathrul fleet was no longer a force of destruction. They were now marionettes, puppets under the control of the weapon. But the victory was bittersweet. As the Fathril screamed in pain, their ships convulsed and exploded, collapsing into themselves, their power gone. But there was something darker at play. The weapon's influence wasn't limited to the Fathril. It was seeping into Mara and Kira as well. They could feel the power growing inside them, twisting their thoughts, tempting them to use it for more than just survival. "We have to stop this," Kira gasped, clutching her head as the weapon's influence took hold. "It's too much." But Mara, now fully consumed by the power, turned toward Kira with a look of cold determination. "It's not enough. The Fathril have fallen. But what if we could control more? What if we could make this last forever?" Kira stepped back, horrified. "No, this is not what we agreed to." But it was too late. The weapon's power had already taken hold, and with it, Mara's resolve. The darkness was consuming her, and she felt invincible. Back on Earth, Azalor and the remaining warriors watched the aftermath of the weapon's destructive power. The Fathril had been defeated, but at what cost? Earth had survived, but the true war was just beginning. The question now was not whether they could defeat the Fathril, but whether they could defeat the very power they had used to save them. And as Mara and Kira stood at the threshold of something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined, Earth's future hung in the balance.